I'm Isabella Rodriguez, 28 years old, and I was standing in my parents' living room when they dropped the bombshell that would change everything. You need to pay Carmen's debts. It's your duty as her sister, my mother said, sliding a stack of papers across the coffee table. My heart stopped when I saw the amount. $523,000. But what came next was even worse. They had secretly mortgaged our family home, the house I grew up in, the house they had paid off years ago. I smiled and nodded, but inside, I was already planning my revenge. Before we dive into this story of betrayal and justice, let me know where you're watching from in the comments below. If you're ready to hear how I turned the tables on my manipulative family, smash that like button and hit subscribe for more incredible true stories. Trust me, you won't believe what happens next when the golden child finally gets what's coming to her. Growing up in the Rodriguez household meant living in Carmen's shadow from the moment I could walk. My sister, 3 years younger than me, was treated like royalty while I was expected to be the responsible, invisible daughter. When Carmen turned 16, our parents surprised her with a brand new BMW, complete with custom leather seats and premium sound system. I remember watching from my bedroom window as she squealed with delight, jumping up and down in our driveway. That same year, I had been working part-time at 3 different jobs just to save money for my own used car, a beat-up Honda with over 200,000 miles that I bought for $1,500 with my own money. The pattern continued through our teenage years and into college. Carmen was accepted to Westfield Academy, a prestigious private university that cost $60,000 per year. Our parents didn't hesitate to write the tuition checks, even taking out a second mortgage on their house to cover the expenses. They threw her a lavish graduation party when she finished high school, inviting over 100 guests and hiring a professional catering company. Meanwhile, I had been accepted to the state university with a partial academic scholarship, but I still needed to cover housing, books, and living expenses. When I asked my parents for help, my father looked at me with disappointment and said, "You're smart enough to figure it out on your own, Isabella. Carmen needs our support more than you do." So, I figured it out. I worked at a campus bookstore during the week, waited tables at a local restaurant on weekends, and tutored struggling students in mathematics during my free time. Some nights, I survived on ramen noodles and peanut butter sandwiches because I couldn't afford proper meals. I watched my classmates enjoy college parties and social events while I was constantly working or studying. Despite the financial stress, I graduated summa cum laude with a degree in finance and immediately landed a position at a reputable investment firm in downtown Chicago. Carmen's college experience was entirely different. She changed her major 4 times, from art history to psychology to communications, finally settling on general studies. She joined the most expensive sorority on campus, took trips to Europe during spring break, and drove a different luxury car each year that our parents leased for her. When she finally graduated after 6 years with a barely passing grade point average, our parents threw another expensive celebration party. I attended with a forced smile, having just received my first promotion at the investment firm, where I was quickly building a reputation as one of their most dedicated financial advisors. After college, the favoritism became even more obvious. Carmen bounced from job to job, never staying anywhere longer than 6 months. She tried opening a boutique clothing store with $50,000 that our parents gave her, but it failed within a year because she spent more time shopping than working. Next, she attempted to become a social media influencer, convincing our parents to fund professional photography equipment and a studio apartment in the trendy part of town. That venture lasted 8 months before she grew bored and moved on to her next scheme. Each time Carmen failed, our parents would say the same thing. "Don't worry, Mija, you'll find your path. Everyone moves at their own pace." But when I worked 80-hour weeks to build my client base and establish myself in the competitive world of financial planning, they barely acknowledged my achievements. I bought my first house at 25, a modest 3-bedroom home in a good neighborhood, and my parents visited exactly once. When Carmen moved back into their basement at 26, they converted the entire lower level into a luxury apartment, complete with a full kitchen, separate entrance, and premium cable package. The breaking point came 2 years ago when Carmen discovered gambling. It started innocently enough at a casino night fundraiser for her college sorority. She won $300 playing blackjack and became convinced that she had a natural talent for reading cards and calculating odds. Our parents encouraged her new hobby, even driving her to the riverboat casinos on weekends and giving her spending money for her gambling adventures. They called it entertainment and said she deserved to have fun after working so hard to find herself. What began as weekend entertainment quickly spiraled into a full-blown addiction. Carmen was spending entire days at the casinos, playing blackjack, poker, and slot machines with increasing desperation. She convinced herself that one big win would solve all her problems and set her up for life. When she started losing consistently, she began borrowing money from our parents, promising to pay them back after her next big score. The amounts grew larger and larger. First 5,000, then 10,000, then 20,000 at a time. By last spring, our parents had given Carmen over $100,000 to support her gambling habit. Though they didn't realize the full extent of her addiction, they believed her stories about investing in poker tournaments and business opportunities at the casino. When I tried to express concern about Carmen's behavior during a family dinner, my mother silenced me with a sharp look and said, "Your sister is an adult who can make her own decisions. You worry too much, Isabella. Focus on your own life." But I couldn't ignore what was happening to my family. I had worked too hard to build financial security for myself, to watch my parents throw their money away on Carmen's destructive behavior. 3 months ago, I hired a private investigator to document Carmen's gambling activities, hoping to gather evidence that might convince my parents to intervene. What I discovered was far worse than I had imagined. Carmen wasn't just gambling away our parents' money, she was borrowing from dangerous people and had accumulated debts that threatened our entire family's safety. The evidence was overwhelming, but when I presented it to my parents, they accused me of being jealous and vindictive. "You've always resented Carmen's free spirit," my father said. "Just because you chose to work yourself to death doesn't mean she has to live the same way." That's when they called the family meeting that would change everything forever. They had made a decision about Carmen's debts, and they expected me to go along with their plan without question. As the successful daughter, it was my responsibility to clean up Carmen's mess and restore peace to our family. The manila folder felt heavy in my hands as I opened it that Sunday afternoon in my parents' living room. Inside were documents that would shatter any remaining illusions I had about my family's priorities. The first page was a mortgage statement showing a principal balance of $523,000 on a house that I knew had been completely paid off just 5 years earlier. My parents had taken out a new 30-year mortgage on their home, using the equity they had built over decades of responsible financial planning. "We had to protect Carmen," my mother explained, her voice defensive but determined. "She was getting phone calls from very scary people, Isabella. They were threatening to hurt her if she didn't pay what she owed." My father nodded gravely, adding, "We couldn't let anything happen to our baby girl. The house was just sitting there, paid off and not working for us." This seemed like the logical solution. I flipped through the remaining documents, my hands shaking as I discovered the full scope of Carmen's financial destruction. Credit card statements showed balances totaling over $80,000 across 12 different cards. Personal loan agreements revealed another $60,000 borrowed from 3 separate financial institutions. But the most shocking discovery was a handwritten IOU for $150,000 to someone named Vincent Torino, with an interest rate of 25% compounded monthly. "Who is Vincent Torino?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. My parents exchanged worried glances before my mother answered. "Hez, a businessman who loans money to people when banks won't help them. Carmen met him at the casino, and he seemed very nice at first, but lately, his phone calls have been aggressive." The picture became clearer as I continued reading. Carmen had been using the house as collateral for multiple loans, forging our parents' signatures on documents they didn't understand. She had convinced them that these were short-term business loans to fund a legitimate investment opportunity in the casino industry. The reality was that she had been desperately trying to win back her losses by betting larger and larger amounts on increasingly risky gambling ventures. "How long has this been going on?" I demanded, holding up a loan agreement dated 18 months earlier. My father looked ashamed as he admitted, "Carmen said she needed our help for just a few months while she got her investment strategy working. We thought we were helping her build a future, not enabling gambling debts." The phone rang while we were talking, and I watched my mother's face turn pale as she answered. "Rodriguez residence?" she said hesitantly. I could hear shouting from the other end of the line, though I couldn't make out the specific words. "Please, sir, we're working on getting you the money," my mother pleaded. "Our other daughter is very successful, and she's going to help us resolve this situation." The caller hung up abruptly, leaving my mother visibly shaken. "That was Vincent's associate," my father explained. "They call 3 times a day now, sometimes more. Yesterday, they drove by the house slowly and took pictures. We're scared, Isabella. We don't know what these people might do if Carmen doesn't pay what she owes." I spent the next hour reviewing every document in the folder, cross-referencing loan amounts with payment schedules and interest calculations. The mathematical reality was devastating. Even if Carmen stopped gambling immediately and got a well-paying job, the monthly payments on all her debts would exceed $4,500 for the next 15 years. Our parents' mortgage payment had increased from $0 to $3,200 per month, money they didn't have since they were both retired and living on fixed Social Security incomes. "This is why we need your help," my mother said, reaching across the table to grab my hand. "You understand money and business better than anyone in our family. Carmen made some mistakes, but she's learned her lesson. She's promised to stop gambling and focus on getting her life back together. We just need someone to take over these payments temporarily while she finds a good job and starts earning steady income." The word "temporarily" hung in the air like a bad joke. Looking at the documents spread across the coffee table, I could see that this financial disaster would take decades to resolve, assuming Carmen never accumulated additional debts. The monthly obligations totaled nearly $8,000, which was more than most people's entire monthly income. My parents were asking me to sacrifice my financial security, my retirement savings, and my future to clean up a mess that Carmen had created through pure selfishness and addiction. "Where is Carmen now?" I asked, suddenly realizing that my sister had been suspiciously absent from this family crisis meeting. My parents looked uncomfortable before my father answered. "She's at the casino. She said she had a system worked out that would win back enough money to pay off Vincent and get us current on the mortgage. She should be back tonight with good news." The irony was so tragic that I almost laughed out loud. While our parents were begging me to sacrifice my life savings to pay off Carmen's gambling debts, she was at the casino creating even more debt. I realized at that moment that my family had no intention of addressing the real problem. They wanted me to enable Carmen's addiction by removing the financial consequences of her behavior, ensuring that she would never face the reality of her destructive choices. But I smiled and nodded, telling my parents that I needed time to review my finances and determine how much I could help. I promised to have an answer for them within a week, knowing that I would spend that time not calculating payment schedules, but planning the most comprehensive revenge strategy imaginable. Carmen had stolen my childhood, my parents' retirement, and our family's financial security. It was time for her to learn that actions have consequences, and that some debts can never be forgiven. Monday morning, I sat in the offices of Harrison, Kellner and Associates, one of Chicago's most respected law firms specializing in financial fraud and elder abuse. Attorney Patricia Kellner listened intently as I explained my family's situation, occasionally taking notes and asking clarifying questions about the timeline of events. When I finished my presentation, she leaned back in her leather chair and shook her head with a mixture of sympathy and professional concern. "Isabella, what you're describing constitutes several serious crimes," Patricia said, pulling out a yellow legal pad. "Forging signatures on loan documents is identity theft and fraud. Using your parents' home as collateral without their full understanding of the terms could be considered elder financial abuse. And if your sister has been accessing credit in your parents' names without proper authorization, we're looking at potential federal charges." I had suspected as much, but hearing it confirmed by a legal expert made the situation feel more real and more serious. Patricia explained that my first step should be gathering comprehensive evidence of Carmen's fraudulent activities. She recommended hiring a forensic accountant to trace all the money movements and document the pattern of deception that had led to this crisis. Before you commit to helping your family financially, Patricia advised, you need to understand the full scope of the problem. Your sister may owe far more money than your parents realize, and there may be additional creditors who haven't contacted your family yet. We need to know exactly what we're dealing with before we can develop an effective legal strategy. That afternoon, I met with David Chen, a private investigator who specialized in financial crimes and gambling-related fraud. David had worked with several families dealing with similar situations, and he understood the complex web of debts and deception that typically surrounded serious gambling addictions. He agreed to conduct a comprehensive investigation of Carmen's activities, including surveillance of her gambling behavior and a thorough review of all financial records associated with her name and social security number. Most problem gamblers don't stop at borrowing from family members, David explained as we discussed his investigation strategy. They typically exhaust every available source of credit before seeking help from loan sharks. Your sister may have opened credit cards, taken cash advances, borrowed against future income, or even used other people's identities to access additional funds. We need to uncover all of these activities before your family faces any more surprise creditors. While David began his investigation, I started my own research into Carmen's recent activities. I obtained copies of my credit reports from all three major agencies and was shocked to discover two credit cards that I had never opened, both with substantial balances and payment histories dating back over 3 years. The addresses on these accounts were Carmen's, various apartments, and our parents' house, but the social security number and employment information were mine. The evidence was overwhelming and infuriating. Carmen had been using my identity to access credit for years, probably since she first started gambling seriously. She had been careful to make minimum payments on these fraudulent accounts to avoid drawing attention, but the balances had grown substantially due to cash advances and balance transfers. In total, she had stolen over $38,000 using my personal information, money that she had gambled away without a second thought about the impact on my financial reputation. I immediately contacted the credit card companies to report the fraud and began the process of disputing these accounts. The customer service representatives were helpful but warned that the investigation process could take several months and would require extensive documentation proving that I had not authorized these accounts. In the meantime, the fraudulent debts would remain on my credit report, potentially affecting my ability to secure loans or maintain my professional licenses in the financial services industry. Thursday evening, I received an urgent phone call from my mother. "Isabella, you need to come over right away," she said, her voice panicked and breathless. "Carmen came home from the casino, and she's very upset. She lost some money, and now those men are calling again. They want to meet with our family tomorrow to discuss payment arrangements." When I arrived at my parents' house, I found Carmen pacing frantically around the living room, her hair disheveled and her clothes wrinkled from spending over 30 hours at the riverboat casino. She looked like she hadn't slept in days, and there was a manic energy in her movements that made me deeply uncomfortable. Our parents sat on the couch looking terrified and defeated, clearly overwhelmed by the escalating pressure from Carmen's creditors. "How much did you lose this time?" I asked Carmen directly, ignoring her dramatic display of distress. She stopped pacing and glared at me with pure hatred before answering. "It doesn't matter how much I lost. What matters is that you're going to fix this problem for our family. Mom and Dad already talked to you about taking over the payments, so stop stalling and write the checks." The entitlement in her voice was breathtaking. Carmen had stolen my identity, destroyed our parents' financial security, borrowed money from dangerous criminals, and was still gambling compulsively, yet she felt entitled to demand that I solve the problems she had created. I could see that our parents were looking at me expectantly, clearly believing that I would simply write checks and make all their problems disappear. "I've been reviewing the documents you gave me," I told my parents, maintaining a calm and professional tone despite my inner fury. "Before I can commit to any payment plan, I need complete financial transparency from Carmen. I want copies of all bank statements, credit card bills, loan agreements, and gambling records for the past 3 years. If I'm going to be financially responsible for these debts, I need to understand exactly what I'm paying for." Carmen's reaction was immediate and explosive. "You don't get to audit my life. she screamed, pointing an accusatory finger at me. This family doesn't work that way. When someone needs help, we help them without asking questions or making demands. You've gotten so cold and calculating since you started working in business. Mom, tell her she can't treat me like some kind of criminal. But I had learned something important about leverage during my years in the financial services industry. People who owe money are never in a position to make demands or set conditions. Carmen needed my help to avoid serious consequences from her creditors, which meant that I could insist on complete transparency and financial accountability as a condition of my assistance. Those are my terms, I said firmly, looking directly at my parents rather than Carmen. Complete financial disclosure, verified gambling addiction counseling, and a realistic budget that includes steady employment for Carmen. If these conditions aren't acceptable, then you'll need to find another solution to your financial problems. The room fell silent as my family absorbed the implications of my ultimatum. For the first time in our relationship, Carmen was not automatically getting everything she wanted simply by throwing a tantrum. Our parents looked confused and conflicted, clearly uncomfortable with the idea of placing demands on their precious youngest daughter. But the phone calls from Vincent's associates were becoming more frequent and more threatening, and they were running out of options for dealing with Carmen's destructive behavior. I left that evening with a promise that Carmen would provide the financial documentation I had requested within 48 hours. As I drove home, I smiled to myself, knowing that Carmen would never voluntarily provide evidence of her fraudulent activities. Her refusal to comply with my reasonable requests would give me the justification I needed to implement the much more aggressive plan that David Chen and I were developing behind the scenes. Carmen's 48-hour deadline came and went without any financial documentation, but it wasn't silence that followed. Instead, I received a barrage of increasingly hostile text messages accusing me of destroying the family and abandoning my responsibilities as a sister. The messages escalated throughout Friday evening, with Carmen alternating between threats, guilt trips, and promises of future cooperation if I would just trust her one more time. Saturday morning, I was awakened at 6 a.m. by pounding on my front door. When I looked through the peephole, I saw Carmen standing on my porch with our parents, all three of them looking determined and angry. I opened the door to find Carmen holding a single bank statement from her primary checking account, clearly hoping that one document would satisfy my request for comprehensive financial disclosure. "Here is your precious paperwork," Carmen said, shoving the statement into my hands. "Are you happy now? Can we please move past this ridiculous audit and focus on solving our family's problems?" The bank statement showed a current balance of $67 and a pattern of cash withdrawals that totaled over $12,000 in the previous month alone. There were no deposits other than occasional transfers from our parents' accounts, confirming that Carmen had no legitimate income to support her gambling activities. "This is just one account from 1 month," I pointed out, scanning the transactions. "I need 3 years of complete records from all financial institutions, including credit cards, loans, and any cash advance accounts. This single statement doesn't provide nearly enough information for me to understand the full scope of your debts." Carmen's face flushed with anger as she realized that her minimal compliance wouldn't satisfy my requirements. "You're being completely unreasonable," my father interjected, clearly frustrated with my insistence on financial transparency. "Carmen has provided what you asked for, and we need you to start helping immediately. Vincent's people are expecting a payment on Monday, and we don't have time for your bureaucratic nonsense." The phrase bureaucratic nonsense stung because it revealed how my family viewed my professional standards and business practices as unnecessary obstacles rather than protective measures. Our confrontation was interrupted by Carmen's phone buzzing with a text message. As she read it, her face went pale, and her hands began trembling noticeably. "They want to meet tonight," she whispered, showing the message to our parents. "Vincent says he's tired of waiting for payment arrangements, and he wants to discuss alternative collection methods with our family." The fear in Carmen's voice seemed genuine, but David Chen's investigation had uncovered some interesting information about Vincent Torino that made me suspicious of this dramatic escalation. According to David's research, Vincent was indeed a loan shark who operated around several local casinos, but he was also Carmen's on-and-off boyfriend for the past 18 months. Their relationship had been volatile and manipulative, with Carmen using romantic involvement to negotiate better terms on her gambling debts. What exactly does alternative collection methods mean? I asked Carmen, watching her reaction carefully. She avoided making eye contact as she answered, I don't know, but Vincent has connections to some very dangerous people. Hess mentioned that families sometimes have to give up property or personal items when they can't make cash payments on schedule. The scenario felt staged and rehearsed, particularly given Carmen's relationship with Vincent that our parents apparently didn't know about. I suspected that Carmen and Vincent had conspired to create additional pressure that would force me to pay her debts immediately, without asking questions or conducting proper due diligence. The timing was too convenient, coming exactly when Carmen was supposed to provide financial documentation she clearly didn't want to share. Maybe we should contact the police, I suggested, testing Carmen's reaction to involving law enforcement in our family's situation. Her response was immediate and panicked. No, absolutely not. Vincent specifically said that involving police would make things much worse for our entire family. We have to handle this privately, just between us. Carmen's refusal to involve law enforcement confirmed my suspicions about the nature of her relationship with Vincent and the legitimacy of his threats. Legitimate creditors, even aggressive ones, don't typically forbid debtors from seeking police protection or legal assistance. The fact that Carmen was actively discouraging police involvement suggested that she was worried about law enforcement discovering fraudulent aspects of her borrowing activities. Sunday evening, I received another call from my mother, asking me to attend an emergency family meeting to discuss Vincent's demands. When I arrived at my parents' house, I found a man I didn't recognize sitting in our living room, drinking coffee and speaking in hushed tones with Carmen. He was tall and thin, with expensive clothes and an artificial smile that never reached his eyes. This, I realized, was Vincent Torino. You must be the successful sister, Vincent said, standing up to shake my hand with exaggerated politeness. Carmen has told me so much about your accomplishments in the financial services industry. I'm hoping we can work together to resolve this unfortunate situation in a way that benefits everyone involved. His tone was smooth and professional, but there was an underlying threat in his words that made my parents visibly nervous. Vincent spent the next 30 minutes outlining his payment plan for Carmen's debts, which involved immediate payment of $75,000 to demonstrate good faith, followed by monthly payments of $8,500 for the next 18 months. The terms were deliberately designed to be financially impossible for a normal family to meet, creating justification for escalated collection tactics. Of course, if immediate payment isn't possible, Vincent continued, looking directly at me, there are other arrangements we can make: collateral agreements, personal guarantees, or alternative service arrangements that would satisfy Carmen's obligations without requiring large cash payments. The phrase alternative service arrangements was deliberately vague and threatening, designed to imply consequences that he didn't want to state explicitly. I listened to Vincent's presentation with professional detachment, analyzing his negotiation tactics and psychological manipulation strategies. Everything about his approach seemed designed to create fear and urgency, while avoiding specific threats that could be reported to law enforcement. Carmen sat next to him throughout the meeting, occasionally touching his arm or nodding in agreement with his statements, behavior that seemed inappropriate for someone who was supposedly terrified of him. I'll need time to review my financial situation and determine what assistance I can provide, I told Vincent, maintaining the same cooperative tone I had used with my parents. This is obviously a significant financial commitment, and I want to make sure I can follow through on any promises I make to your organization. Vincent's smile became more genuine as he interpreted my response as compliance with his demands. I appreciate your cooperation, Isabella. Carmen is very lucky to have such a successful and caring sister. I'm confident we can reach an arrangement that works for everyone involved. He shook my hand again before leaving, warning that he would need a definitive answer within 72 hours. After Vincent left, Carmen's demeanor changed completely. The fear and anxiety she had displayed during his presentation disappeared, replaced by excitement and relief that I appeared willing to pay her debts. I knew you would come through for us, she said, hugging me with genuine affection for the first time in years. You're the best sister anyone could ask for, and I promise I'll pay you back every penny once I get my life straightened out. But I had seen enough to confirm that Carmen and Vincent were working together to manipulate our family, and I was ready to spring the trap that David Chen and I had been preparing for weeks. Carmen's performance with Vincent had been convincing, but her immediate personality change after his departure revealed the truth about their relationship. It was time to call their bluff and expose the elaborate deception they had constructed to steal my money. Tuesday afternoon brought an unexpected escalation that caught even me off guard. I was reviewing client portfolios at my office when my assistant buzzed the intercom to inform me that my mother was on line 2, crying hysterically and barely able to speak coherently. Through her sobs, I managed to understand that Vincent's men had arrived at my parents' house with a moving truck and were removing furniture and personal belongings as partial payment for Carmen's debts. I immediately drove to my childhood home, where I found a scene of carefully orchestrated chaos designed to terrify my elderly parents into complete compliance. 3 men in expensive suits were loading our family's antique dining room set into the back of a rental truck, while Carmen stood in the driveway wringing her hands and apologizing profusely for the misunderstanding that had led to this crisis. My parents were huddled together on the front porch, watching decades of accumulated possessions disappear into the truck. "Stop right there!" I called out to the men, pulling out my phone to record everything that was happening. "This is private property, and I'm documenting this entire incident for law enforcement purposes." The men paused their loading activities and looked at Carmen questioningly, clearly unsure how to proceed when confronted with someone who wasn't intimidated by their presence. Vincent emerged from inside the house carrying my grandmother's silver tea service, the same set that had been passed down through 3 generations of Rodriguez women. "Isabella, I'm so sorry you have to see this," he said with mock sincerity. "Your parents and Carmen assured me that you would handle the payment arrangements by today, but since we haven't received anything, I had no choice but to begin collecting collateral items." The performance was masterful in its psychological manipulation. Vincent was presenting himself as a reasonable businessman who had been forced into unpleasant collection activities by my family's failure to honor their commitments. Carmen was playing the role of helpless victim who desperately wanted to prevent this traumatic scene, but was powerless to stop it. My parents were the terrified elderly couple caught in circumstances beyond their understanding or control. "How much are you claiming these items are worth?" I asked Vincent, continuing to record our conversation. He pulled out a clipboard with an itemized list showing inflated values for common household furniture and personal belongings. According to his calculations, my grandmother's tea service was worth $8,000, the dining room set was valued at $12,000, and various other items totaled another $15,000. "These appraisals seem significantly higher than fair market value," I observed, photographing each page of his inventory list. Vincent's smile remained fixed, but I could see irritation in his eyes as he realized I wasn't going to be easily intimidated by his collection activities. "Market values are always subjective," he replied smoothly. "These are quality pieces that will bring good prices at auction." Carmen stepped forward, her face streaked with tears that seemed genuine despite her involvement in orchestrating this scenario. "Please, Isabella, just pay him what I owe, and we can get all of Mom and Dad's things back." I never wanted it to come to this, but Vincent says this is standard procedure when payment arrangements aren't honored on schedule. The mention of standard procedure was particularly interesting because David Chen's investigation had revealed that Vincent typically operated through verbal agreements and psychological intimidation rather than formal collection activities involving physical property. This elaborate show of force was specifically designed to pressure me into immediate payment without asking questions about the legitimacy of Carmen's debts or Vincent's authority to collect them. "I want to see the original loan documents that authorize you to seize personal property as collateral," I told Vincent, keeping my phone recording throughout our interaction. His response was immediate and telling. "Those are private financial documents between Carmen and my organization. Family members don't have access to confidential borrower information unless they're officially guaranteeing the debt." Vincent's refusal to provide documentation was exactly what I had expected, and it confirmed my suspicions about the fraudulent nature of this entire collection scenario. Legitimate lenders always provide detailed documentation of collateral agreements, payment terms, and legal collection procedures. Vincent's evasiveness suggested that his loan agreements with Carmen wouldn't stand up to legal scrutiny. In that case, I need to consult with my attorney before agreeing to any payment arrangements, I announced, watching Vincent's reaction carefully. This appears to be a complex legal situation involving elderly financial abuse and potentially fraudulent collection practices. I want to make sure any payments I make are properly documented and legally valid. The effect of mentioning legal consultation was immediate and dramatic. Vincent's confident demeanor shifted noticeably, and he exchanged meaningful glances with Carmen that revealed their partnership more clearly than any verbal admission could have. "Of course," Vincent said, his voice slightly less smooth than before. "But legal consultations take time, and interest continues to accumulate on outstanding balances. Delay can be very expensive for borrowing families." Carmen jumped in quickly, clearly trying to discourage me from involving lawyers in our family's financial problems. "We don't need attorneys complicating this situation," she said urgently. "Vincent has been very reasonable about payment terms, and involving lawyers will just create more problems for everyone. Can't you just trust me to handle this the way I've been handling it?" The irony of Carmen asking me to trust her handling of financial matters was almost laughable given the evidence of fraud and deception that surrounded every aspect of her relationship with Vincent. But I maintained my cooperative facade, agreeing to consider immediate payment if Vincent would provide proper documentation of Carmen's original loan agreements and current account balances. "I'll give you 24 hours to gather the paperwork," I told Vincent, knowing that he couldn't provide legitimate loan documentation because the entire scheme was based on Carmen's gambling losses and their romantic relationship rather than formal business transactions. "If you can show me proper legal documentation of these debts, I'll arrange for immediate payment tomorrow evening." Vincent agreed to my timeline, but I could see that he and Carmen were becoming increasingly uncomfortable with my insistence on proper documentation and legal verification. As they loaded the remaining items into their truck, I continued recording and photographing everything, making sure to capture clear images of license plates and faces that could be used for identification purposes if legal action became necessary. After Vincent's crew departed with several pieces of furniture, I spent the evening comforting my parents and assuring them that their belongings would be returned once the truth about Carmen's debts was revealed. They were confused and frightened by the day's events, unable to understand how their family had become involved with dangerous criminals over Carmen's gambling activities. "How did it come to this?" my mother asked, holding my father's hand as we sat in their partially empty living room. "Carmen always said she was just having fun at the casinos, that it was like entertainment. We never thought it would lead to men taking our furniture." The genuine confusion and fear in her voice made me angrier at Carmen than I had ever been before. My sister had manipulated our elderly parents into believing that her gambling addiction was harmless fun, hiding the reality of her mounting debts until the consequences threatened our entire family's security. That night, I called David Chen to update him on the day's events and confirm that we had gathered sufficient evidence to expose Carmen's deception. David had been monitoring Vincent's activities and had discovered several important facts about his relationship with Carmen that would prove their conspiracy to defraud our family. Tomorrow would bring the confrontation I had been planning for weeks, and Carmen was about to learn that her years of manipulation and financial abuse were finally coming to an end. Wednesday evening, I called an emergency family meeting under the pretense of finalizing payment arrangements with Vincent and his associates. I had spent the day coordinating with David Chen and attorney Patricia Kellner to ensure that all evidence was properly documented and that law enforcement would be standing by if the situation escalated beyond my ability to manage safely. Carmen arrived at our parents' house accompanied by Vincent, both of them clearly expecting to collect a substantial check that would resolve their fabricated crisis. "Before we discuss payment arrangements," I began, setting a thick manila folder on the coffee table, "I want to share some information that my attorney discovered during his review of Carmen's debt situation." Vincent's confident smile faltered slightly as he noticed the professional quality of the documentation I was presenting, but Carmen seemed oblivious to the trap that was about to be sprung. "David Chen is a private investigator who specializes in financial fraud and gambling-related crimes," I continued, opening the folder to reveal surveillance photographs of Carmen and Vincent together at various restaurants and hotels over the past 6 months. These images show that Carmen and Vincent have been romantically involved throughout the period when these supposed loan shark debts were accumulating. The silence in the room was deafening as my parents absorbed the implications of what they were seeing. Carmen and Vincent were clearly a couple in the photographs, holding hands, kissing, and displaying the kind of intimate behavior that contradicted their claims about a purely business relationship. My mother's hand flew to her mouth in shock, while my father's face flushed with anger as he realized the extent of the deception. The so-called loan agreements between Carmen and Vincent are fabrications, I explained, turning to additional pages that showed financial records David had obtained through his investigation. Vincent operates a small-scale gambling operation at the Riverboat Casino, but he's not a legitimate moneylender. The debts Carmen claims to owe him are actually gambling losses from their joint betting activities, combined with money she's borrowed from him personally as his girlfriend. Carmen tried to interrupt, but I held up my hand and continued presenting evidence. More importantly, the threatening phone calls and collection activities have all been staged performances designed to manipulate our family into paying for Carmen's gambling losses. The men who came yesterday to take furniture were Vincent's friends who were paid to play roles in this elaborate fraud scheme. Vincent stood up abruptly, clearly recognizing that his scheme had been completely exposed. "This is ridiculous," he said, but his voice lacked the confident authority he had displayed during previous encounters. "Carmen owes me legitimate debts from gambling activities, and I have every right to collect what she borrowed from me." His statement was a crucial admission that contradicted their previous claims about formal loan agreements with interest rates and payment schedules. "Actually, you don't have any legal right to collect gambling debts," I replied, turning to documentation that Patricia Kellner had prepared. Gambling debts aren't legally enforceable in Illinois, which means that any collection activities related to casino losses constitute harassment and potential extortion. More importantly, conspiring with Carmen to defraud our elderly parents makes both of you liable for criminal charges. The evidence continued to mount as I presented bank records showing money transfers between Carmen's accounts and Vincent's personal checking account, phone records documenting their frequent communication during supposed collection periods, and witness statements from casino employees who had observed their romantic relationship over many months. The mortgage on our parents' house was obtained through forged signatures and misrepresented information, I explained, showing copies of the loan documents that contained suspicious inconsistencies. Carmen convinced our parents to sign papers they didn't understand by claiming these were temporary business loans rather than permanent debt obligations. The bank is now investigating potential mortgage fraud based on evidence that Patricia Kellner provided to their security department. My parents looked devastated as they realized how thoroughly Carmen had deceived them about every aspect of her financial situation. The woman they had sacrificed their retirement security to protect had been systematically lying to them while stealing from me and manipulating them into dangerous financial commitments. Carmen finally found her voice, but instead of apologizing or accepting responsibility, she launched into an attack on my character and motivations. "You've always been jealous of me," she screamed, pointing an accusatory finger in my direction. "You can't stand that Mom and Dad love me more than they love you, so you're making up lies to destroy my relationship and turn everyone against me." The accusation was so typical of Carmen's manipulation tactics that I almost smiled. Even when confronted with overwhelming evidence of her fraud and deception, she was trying to make herself the victim and me the villain in our family's crisis. "I'm not making anything up," I replied calmly, handing copies of the evidence to my parents so they could review everything independently. Vincent attempted to salvage the situation by minimizing the extent of their deception. "Look, maybe Carmen and I got involved personally during our business relationship, but that doesn't change the fact that she owes money from gambling activities. Mixing business with pleasure isn't illegal, and I still deserve to be paid for money I've loaned her. The illegal part is conspiring to defraud elderly victims through staged threats and false collection activities," I explained, showing Vincent the documentation that Patricia Kellner had prepared for law enforcement. "Carmen used your relationship to create fake urgency that pressured our parents into mortgaging their home. Both of you participated in elder financial abuse, identity theft, and fraud conspiracy. Carmen made one final desperate attempt to maintain her victim status by threatening suicide if our family didn't support her through this crisis. "If you don't help me, I don't have any reason to keep living," she sobbed dramatically, throwing herself onto the couch. "Vincent's real associates will kill me if I don't pay what I owe them, and now you're trying to send me to prison for trying to protect our family." But my parents had heard enough lies, and Carmen's suicide threat was the final manipulation that broke their willingness to enable her destructive behavior. "Get out of our house," my father said quietly, standing up and pointing toward the door. "We're done being manipulated by your lies and schemes. You've destroyed our financial security and betrayed our trust for the last time." The police arrived exactly on schedule, having been alerted by Patricia Kellner that evidence of fraud would be presented at this family meeting. Carmen and Vincent were arrested on charges of conspiracy to commit fraud, elder financial abuse, and harassment. As they were led away in handcuffs, Carmen continued screaming about how unfair everyone was being and how she was the real victim in this situation. The criminal proceedings against Carmen and Vincent moved forward quickly once prosecutors reviewed the comprehensive evidence that David Chen and Patricia Kellner had assembled. Carmen was charged with identity theft, mortgage fraud, elder financial abuse, and conspiracy to commit fraud. Vincent faced charges for harassment, attempted extortion, and conspiracy. Both were released on bail, but prohibited from contacting our family or engaging in any collection activities related to the fraudulent debts. The civil lawsuit I filed against Carmen for damages from her identity theft and fraud took longer to develop but ultimately proved more satisfying than the criminal case. Patricia Kellner's financial experts calculated that Carmen had stolen over $98,000 from me through identity theft and credit fraud, plus an additional $140,000 from our parents through the mortgage scheme and various other deceptions. Carmen's legal defense strategy was predictable and desperate. Her attorney attempted to portray her as a gambling addict whose mental illness had impaired her judgment and decision-making abilities. They argued that Carmen couldn't be held fully responsible for her actions because addiction was a medical condition that affected her ability to understand the consequences of her behavior. The strategy might have generated some sympathy if Carmen had shown any genuine remorse or willingness to accept responsibility for the harm she had caused our family. Instead, she continued to maintain that she was the victim of a conspiracy by Vincent and me to destroy her life. During her deposition, she actually claimed that I had manufactured evidence against her because I was jealous of our parents' love and wanted to eliminate her from the family. Carmen has shown no insight into her destructive behavior and no genuine commitment to changing her patterns of manipulation and fraud, the court-appointed psychologist concluded in his evaluation report. While she clearly suffers from gambling addiction, she also demonstrates antisocial personality traits that make her likely to continue engaging in deceptive and exploitative behavior toward family members and intimate partners. The mortgage company's investigation revealed that Carmen had forged our parents' signatures on several loan modification documents and had misrepresented their income and asset information to qualify for the refinancing. The bank initiated foreclosure proceedings against our parents' house, but Patricia Kellner negotiated a settlement that allowed them to avoid losing their home in exchange for accepting a reduced principal balance and extended payment terms. Our parents testified against Carmen during both the criminal and civil proceedings, a decision that caused them tremendous emotional pain, but was necessary to establish the pattern of deception and manipulation that had led to their financial victimization. Their testimony was particularly powerful because it detailed years of enabling behavior that Carmen had exploited to avoid facing consequences for her gambling addiction and financial irresponsibility. "We thought we were helping our daughter build a better life," my mother testified during Carmen's sentencing hearing. "Instead, we were enabling behavior that became more destructive and dangerous each year." Carmen took advantage of our love and concern to steal money that we had saved for our retirement security. Carmen received a sentence of 36 months in state prison, with the possibility of early release after 18 months if she completed residential gambling addiction treatment and maintained steady employment upon release. Vincent received a lighter sentence of 18 months plus community service because he had no previous criminal record and had cooperated with investigators after his arrest. The civil judgment in my favor was more substantial than I had expected. The court awarded me full restitution for the identity theft damages, plus punitive damages for the emotional distress and professional impact of Carmen's fraudulent activities. The total judgment was over $250,000. Though collecting that amount would require ongoing legal action since Carmen had no significant assets or earning capacity. Patricia Kellner arranged for garnishment of any future wages Carmen might earn, and placed liens on any property she might acquire. Financial judgments like this typically take years to collect, Patricia explained, but they ensure that Carmen can't build wealth or acquire assets without satisfying her debt to you. If she ever inherits money, wins a lottery, or develops significant earning capacity, we'll be able to collect what she owes you. The most satisfying aspect of the legal proceedings was watching Carmen's manipulation tactics fail completely in the formal court environment. Judges, prosecutors, and jury members weren't swayed by her tears, accusations, or attempts to portray herself as a victim of circumstances beyond her control. The evidence spoke for itself, and Carmen's criminal behavior was punished accordingly. Our parents faced financial consequences as well, though I helped them negotiate manageable payment arrangements for the remaining mortgage debt that Carmen had created. They moved to a smaller house in a more affordable neighborhood and learned to live within the constraints of their Social Security income without expecting Carmen to eventually repay the money she had stolen from them. "We should have listened to you years ago when you tried to warn us about Carmen's gambling," my father admitted during one of our monthly dinners at their new home. "We enabled her destructive behavior because we couldn't accept that our youngest daughter was capable of the kind of deliberate deception and manipulation that destroyed our family's financial security." The legal victories felt good, but they couldn't erase the years of emotional manipulation and financial stress that Carmen had inflicted on our family. More importantly, they couldn't guarantee that Carmen would emerge from prison with genuine insight into her behavior or commitment to changing the patterns that had led to this crisis. 18 months after her sentencing, Carmen was released from Dwight Correctional Center, having completed the mandatory gambling addiction treatment program and earned credits for good behavior during her incarceration. I learned about her release through Patricia Kellner, who had been monitoring the case to ensure that Carmen complied with the terms of her civil judgment and stayed current on her restitution obligations. Against my better judgment, I decided to visit Carmen during her final week in prison to see if her time in the residential treatment program had generated any genuine insight into the destructive patterns that had led to our family's crisis. The woman I met in the visiting room looked physically healthier than she had in years, with clear skin and steady eyes that suggested she had been sober from gambling and probably other substances during her incarceration. "Isabella, I'm so glad you came," Carmen said, reaching across the table to grab my hands. "I've been hoping for months that you would visit so I could apologize for everything that happened and explain how much I've learned about myself during treatment." Her words sounded rehearsed, but I was curious to hear what she had to say after completing intensive therapy and addiction counseling. Carmen spent the next hour describing her treatment program, the insights she had gained about the psychological roots of her gambling addiction, and her plans for rebuilding her life after release. She talked about getting a job in the hospitality industry, finding an apartment in a different city where she wouldn't be tempted by familiar casino environments, and eventually earning enough money to begin repaying the restitution she owed me. "I know I can never fully repair the damage I caused our family," she continued, "but I want you to know that I understand now how my addiction hurt everyone who loved me. The treatment program helped me recognize the manipulation tactics I used to avoid taking responsibility for my behavior, and I'm committed to being honest and accountable from now on." The speech was everything I might have hoped to hear from Carmen, but something about her delivery felt calculating rather than authentic. Her eye contact was too intense, her voice too carefully modulated, and her body language too controlled for someone who was experiencing genuine emotional transformation. I had the distinct impression that Carmen had learned to mimic the language of recovery and accountability without actually experiencing the internal changes that those words represented. "What are your specific plans for avoiding gambling in the future?" I asked, testing whether her apparent insights extended beyond rehearsed talking points. Carmen's answer was immediate and detailed, describing her intention to use blocking software on electronic devices, avoid casino environments completely, and maintain regular contact with a sponsor from Gamblers Anonymous. But when I asked about her plans for repaying our parents for the money they had lost due to her deceptions, Carmen's response revealed that her fundamental character hadn't changed during her imprisonment. "Mom and Dad knew the risks when they decided to help me," she said, her voice becoming defensive. "They're adults who made their own choices about how to use their money, and I can't be responsible for decisions they made independently." The statement was stunning in its complete lack of accountability. Even after 18 months of supposedly intensive addiction treatment, Carmen still couldn't acknowledge that she had manipulated our elderly parents into making financial decisions based on lies and false information. She was still portraying herself as someone who had been helped by willing family members, rather than as someone who had systematically deceived and exploited the people who loved her. "Our parents mortgaged their house because you told them Vincent would hurt you if they didn't help pay your gambling debts," I reminded her. "They made those decisions based on information you gave them that turned out to be completely false." Carmen's response was immediate and telling. "I believed Vincent was dangerous at the time, so I wasn't lying when I told them I was scared." The conversation confirmed my suspicions that Carmen had spent her time in prison, learning to speak the language of recovery, without actually experiencing the internal transformation that would make her safe to be around our family. She had learned to say the right words about accountability and change, but she still couldn't take genuine responsibility for the specific ways her behavior had harmed the people who had tried to help her. Carmen was released on a Thursday morning in late spring, and by the following Tuesday, she had already contacted our parents asking for financial assistance with apartment deposits and transportation expenses. Despite everything they had experienced, our parents were still vulnerable to Carmen's manipulation tactics and were considering providing the help she requested. "She sounds different this time," my mother explained when I called to discuss Carmen's latest requests. "She talks about the treatment she received and the insights she gained about her addiction. Maybe prison really did help her understand the mistakes she made in the past." The hope in my mother's voice was heartbreaking because I could see that Carmen was already beginning another cycle of manipulation that would eventually lead to more financial exploitation and family trauma. I spent an evening reviewing all the evidence that Patricia Kellner and David Chen had assembled during the original investigation, reminding myself of the comprehensive pattern of lies and manipulation that Carmen had maintained even when confronted with overwhelming evidence of her deceptions. People who engage in that level of calculated fraud don't typically transform their fundamental character through 18 months of prison-based addiction treatment. 2 weeks after Carmen's release, she called me directly to propose a meeting where we could start rebuilding our sisterly relationship. She suggested meeting at a restaurant near the Riverboat Casino, where she had accumulated many of her original gambling debts, a location choice that seemed deliberately provocative, given her claims about avoiding gambling environments. I declined her invitation and made a decision that I should have made years earlier. I changed my phone number, updated my address with a mail forwarding service that would protect my new location, and informed Patricia Kellner that any future contact from Carmen should be directed through legal channels related to her restitution obligations. Carmen had been given multiple opportunities to demonstrate genuine change and accountability, and she had failed every test of sincerity and trustworthiness. 5 years have passed since I cut all contact with Carmen and established firm boundaries with my parents regarding their relationship with her. In that time, I've built a life that feels authentic and fulfilling in ways I never experienced while trying to manage my family's dysfunction and Carmen's destructive behavior. I expanded my financial planning practice into my own firm, specializing in helping families recover from financial abuse and addiction-related trauma. The work has been deeply rewarding because I understand firsthand how family manipulation can destroy financial security and emotional well-being. I've helped dozens of clients recognize patterns of exploitation by addicted family members and develop strategies for protecting themselves while still maintaining appropriate boundaries with people they love. Many of these clients struggle with the same guilt and obligation that kept me trapped in my family's dysfunctional patterns for years. Setting boundaries with family members doesn't mean you love them less. I tell clients who are wrestling with decisions about financial assistance for addicted relatives, It means you love yourself enough to avoid enabling behavior that ultimately harms everyone involved. The insight sounds simple, but implementing it requires tremendous courage and emotional strength, especially when family members use guilt and manipulation to maintain their dysfunctional relationships. My parents and I have developed a relationship that works within carefully defined limits. We have dinner together once a month, exchange birthday and holiday gifts, and maintain contact that feels warm but protected. They occasionally mention Carmen's latest problems or requests for help, but they've learned to respect my decision not to be involved in any aspect of her life or problems. Carmen has been arrested twice since her release from prison, once for writing bad checks and once for credit card fraud involving a roommate's personal information. She spent additional time in county jail and was ordered to complete additional addiction counseling, but the pattern of her behavior remains unchanged. According to my parents, she continues to ask for money while making promises about repayment and change that never materialize into sustained behavioral improvements. "I think we finally understand what you tried to tell us years ago," my father admitted during one of our monthly dinners. "Carmen's problems aren't caused by bad luck or circumstances beyond her control. She makes deliberate choices to lie and manipulate people, and those choices have consequences that we can't fix by giving her money or making excuses for her behavior." The acknowledgement felt validating, but it also made me sad for all the years our family had been trapped in cycles of crisis and drama that prevented us from enjoying genuine relationships with each other. My parents' golden years should have been spent traveling and enjoying their retirement, not dealing with collection calls and mortgage payments created by their daughter's gambling addiction and fraudulent activities. Through therapy and personal development work, I've come to understand that my role in our family's dysfunction was playing the responsible rescuer who enabled everyone else's avoidance of accountability. By constantly solving problems and cleaning up messes, I prevented my family members from experiencing the natural consequences of their choices and learning to make better decisions independently. "You can't change people who don't want to change," my therapist reminded me during one of our sessions. "You can only control your own choices and responses to their behavior." Trying to manage other people's problems prevents them from developing the skills and motivation they need to solve those problems themselves. The most surprising aspect of my healing journey has been discovering how much energy I had been investing in managing my family's chaos and drama. Without the constant stress of Carmen's crises and my parents' enabling responses, I found mental and emotional space for relationships and activities that bring genuine joy and fulfillment to my life. I've traveled to countries I had always wanted to visit, developed hobbies that were previously impossible due to family obligations, and built friendships with people who value honesty and mutual support. 2 years ago, I met David, a man who appreciates my strength and independence rather than seeing them as threats to his ego or obstacles to overcome. Our relationship is built on mutual respect, honest communication, and shared values about personal responsibility and emotional health. David has never asked me for money, never created drama that requires my intervention, and never made his well-being dependent on my willingness to sacrifice my own needs and boundaries. "You deserve to be with people who add value to your life rather than people who drain your energy and resources," David told me early in our relationship. "The fact that someone is related to you doesn't give them the right to exploit your kindness or manipulate your emotions." His perspective helped me understand that love and family loyalty don't require accepting abuse or enabling destructive behavior from people who refuse to take responsibility for their choices. Carmen still sends occasional cards and letters to my office, usually around holidays or significant dates, attempting to re-establish contact and rebuild our relationship. The messages follow predictable patterns, alternating between guilt-inducing statements about family obligations and promises of change that sound identical to commitments she made years ago during previous crises. I don't read these communications anymore, instead forwarding them directly to Patricia Kellner's office, where they're kept as documentation of Carmen's ongoing attempts to violate the boundaries I've established. Recovery from family trauma takes time and ongoing commitment to healthy boundaries, my therapist explained during our final session. "You've learned to recognize manipulation tactics, protect your financial and emotional resources, and build relationships based on mutual respect rather than obligation and guilt. These skills will serve you well for the rest of your life. The journey from victimization to empowerment has taught me that sometimes the most loving thing you can do for family members is refuse to enable their destructive behavior by removing yourself as a potential target for manipulation and exploitation. Carmen may never develop the insight or motivation necessary to change her patterns of fraud and deception, but I don't have to participate in or suffer from those patterns anymore. My story has resonated with many people who have shared similar experiences with addicted or manipulative family members. When I speak at conferences about financial planning and family boundary setting, audience members often approach me afterward to share their own stories of exploitation and the difficulty they've experienced in protecting themselves while maintaining family relationships. Thank you for talking about the reality that some family members can't be trusted with our resources or emotional well-being, one woman told me after a presentation. I've felt so guilty about limiting contact with my brother, but your story helped me understand that protecting myself isn't selfish or unloving. These conversations remind me that family dysfunction and financial abuse are much more common than most people realize, and that sharing our experiences can help others recognize and escape similar situations. Looking back on the crisis that prompted this entire journey, I'm grateful for the painful experience that taught me to value myself enough to demand honesty and accountability in my relationships. Carmen's betrayal and my parents' enabling behavior could have destroyed my financial security and emotional health if I had continued trying to rescue and manage them instead of focusing on my own healing and growth. Today, I live in a beautiful home that I purchased without co-signers or family assistance, surrounded by people who value integrity and mutual support. My financial planning business helps families build security and avoid the kind of exploitation that nearly destroyed my own family's stability. Most importantly, I've learned that walking away from toxic family members isn't abandonment or failure. It's self-preservation and wisdom. For anyone who recognizes their own family patterns in this story, I want you to know that change is possible, and that you deserve relationships built on respect rather than manipulation. Setting boundaries with family members who exploit your kindness isn't easy, but it's necessary for your own well-being and for creating space in your life for people who genuinely care about your happiness and success. Sometimes the greatest gift you can give yourself is the courage to stop participating in relationships that diminish your potential and drain your resources. The path to healing begins with a single decision to value yourself enough to demand better treatment from the people in your life, even when those people are family members who expect unconditional tolerance for their destructive behavior. You have the right to protect your financial security, emotional health, and personal boundaries, regardless of guilt trips or manipulation tactics from people who benefit from your willingness to sacrifice yourself for their convenience. What family boundaries have you had to set to protect yourself from financial or emotional manipulation? Have you ever had to choose between enabling a family member's destructive behavior or protecting your own well-being? Share your experiences in the comments below, because your story might help someone else recognize similar patterns in their own family relationships. If this video resonated with your experiences, please hit the like button and subscribe for more stories about overcoming family dysfunction and building authentic, healthy relationships. Don't forget to share this video with friends or family members who might benefit from hearing about boundary setting and recovery from family financial abuse. Thank you for taking the time to listen to my story, and I hope it helps you find the courage to create the life you deserve, surrounded by people who truly value and respect you.